Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are back here in the Hendrickson Library at the Institute for the Preservation of Western Civilization, housed here at ITR World Headquarters. You have John Hendrickson and myself ready to give you, I don't know if we'd call it rapid reaction to last night's election results, but they are still timely, as we are not even yet 24 hours beyond the polls closing last night. So, John, you were in the war room last night.
I was, yes.
I mean, just tell me about the vibe and what you were thinking going into the election and how you're feeling now.
I was going in. I was very nervous, pessimistic, and by 8 o'clock, I was getting very excited.
Yeah,
and feeling like we were gonna win. And when I was in shock this morning because they declared President Trump the victor.
Yeah.
And people were telling us that we might not even know till Friday or later.
Yeah, we did have a lot of that. I think we really knew that Trump was the president-elect probably by midnight, and I think they sort of started. It was on my drive home from the war room to home when because I'm getting old and can't stay up that late anymore. That's about the time they called that, and but it was fine. I had you there, and I was busy, talking to everyone and starting to look at the Iowa legislative results, and I kept hollering over at you, John, what's going on? What do I need to know about what's going on nationally? And about every other time I'd talk to you, you're like, oh no, it looks good, and then I don't know. Yeah. You had me on a bit of a roller coaster for about an hour on that one.
Well, they kept kind of going back and forth on some of the states, and I think they're being cautious on some of the reporting, which I can understand, not wanting to call a state too early.
Yeah.
And so they were looking at key counties in some states, and at one time, there was I forget what network it was, but I was getting texts from people from different states panicking because they were different networks were saying that Harris was leading in Iowa.
Yeah. And
so there was some panic going on that, they were asking, is this true? Is Harris going to win Iowa?
I'm going to sound like a grizzled old veteran when I say this, John, but I have stared at Iowa election results statewide for a number of cycles now. And it was the first results to come in are always in Polk County. And obviously that is a big chunk of the state's population. But, Kamala Harris won Polk County, surprising to no one. Yeah. So, you knew that was going to happen. We're going to get in because there's a lot of the action in the legislative races in Polk County, which we were really watching and stuff around the state. And I want to get into that. But I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the national results. And so as the time we do this, and we have almost all of the numbers in Iowa, there's apparently there's a few absentee ballots that haven't been tabulated, maybe in Washington County on the Miller Meeks race. Looks like she's up by a few hundred votes and is going to win. But we know what's going to happen. And it looks like President Trump will win, as of right now, Iowa by 13.2 points.
Yeah.
That's a little bit better than the Kamala +3 that the Des Moines Register and Ann Selzer had. Now, I mean, as our good friend Alan Osterman put it, I was able to figure that out based on my undergraduate political science degree that +13 is better than -3. But I think there were a lot of folks that thought maybe we were looking at a Trump +8 to Trump +10. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he shot right past that. But we tried to tell people, John, on this podcast and other places, that there was no way that it was anywhere near Kamala -3. Mm-hmm. that was broken. It's not margin of error broken. It's not by one standard deviation broken. It's not even an outlier broken. It was flat out false. And to anyone that has spent time looking at Iowa politics knows that it was just flatly false, wrong, outside of any possible margin of anything. Did you see the meme that Republican Party of Chairman Jeff Kaufman?
I did, yes.
Yeah, where he's leaning down next to the meme where he's next to the grave. Yeah, no.
Well, I
the
saw
Iowa poll on the gravestone. That's pretty good.
I don't know if it was on Channel 8 or the Register where I think Ann Selzer said she was going to go back and reevaluate the data to see where she went wrong.
I think she can stare at that data set all she wants. It's just broken. I don't know what to tell you.
It reminds me of the same people that got the data wrong, saying it was okay to open our markets to China. And they're
nice.
Yeah. Their nice little spreadsheets said that would benefit our economy.
Yeah. I want to read this list because I think that one of the stories, if we're going to talk about the results nationally, is that look, Iowa moved to the right, much like the rest of the country moved to the right over 2020. Did you see the bit? Look, I've been watching clips of CNN and MSNBC all day because they just bring me joy.
Yeah.
But did you see the one where it's John King on his touchscreen on CNN?
No, I did not see that.
And they're clicking through some Pennsylvania results or whatever, and he says, "Well, now let's look at this map, which is everywhere that has shifted from red to blue, where Kamala Harris has picked up support over the last presidential election." So they click the button, and it's nothing. There isn't a single district in the entire country, and they're just sit there in stunned silence.
Yeah.
Really? There was nowhere where they outperformed their previous results.
Wow.
So in Iowa, we're looking at that's a +6, +5 or 6 over previous results. Iowa has become very red.
Yeah.
And especially a populist Trump version of red. I'm going to read you a list, John, and then I want to get your take on this. Here's a list of blue states that were more competitive than Iowa. So here's states that were closer to flipping than Iowa: New Hampshire, Minnesota, New Jersey, Virginia, New Mexico, Illinois. Only an 8-point Kamala Harris win in Illinois. Maine, Connecticut, 10.7. New York State, 10.8. Colorado, Oregon. Kamala Harris only won Oregon by 12.4 points. And rounding out the list of Rhode Island at 13 points. All of those states were more competitive than Iowa. I'm completely bought into the fact that politics is, there's a pendulum, they are cyclical, and it won't be like this forever. But I was pretty red.
Yes, yeah.
So you got any hot takes on Minnesota? Because that ended up being fairly close, but maybe not as close as you want.
I do, and I think it to a certain extent this applies to some of those other states you mentioned, and that is one thing is former President Trump has really appealed to the middle class, specifically what we call working class blue collar workers.
Yeah.
And traditional, labor demographic, regardless of union endorsements, union membership tended to back Trump. People with that don't have college degrees maybe tended to support President Trump, and it was really the elites that were backing Harris and the coastal elites. And also you saw, in terms of demographics, you saw a lot of Latino men supporting former President Trump, and you saw a lot of minorities supporting the Republican candidates this time. But I think a big part of the shift here is, the blue-collar support. That
that's right.
This coalition that Trump was able to put together, and that are just basically people getting sick and tired of the radicalism of the Democratic Party. Both from an economic perspective and a social perspective. Whether it's there was from immigration to workers that were tired of inflation and jobs being sent overseas and so forth.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Okay, I'm gonna ask you to kind of put your historian hat on here, and this is, we'll get into some other takeaways later. Before we move off of the presidential election, give me a bigger comeback story in American political history than Donald Trump. And then there may be one. I want to get your take on that question.
That's a great question. I want to say I would have to spend more time thinking, but one comparison would be Richard Nixon.
Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Loses in 1960.
Yeah, then he loses the governors.
Yeah. That part's forgotten.
Yeah.
And then comes back and wins in 1968.
Yeah. Yep.
I think the difference there, and I think that's a good one to compare to. I don't know that Richard Nixon was ever as out as Trump was.
No.
I mean, think about how far
Yeah.
sort of the political establishment and the media, how far out of politics and the ability to win he was driven
Yeah.
after he
Yeah.
left office. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody else that you'd put on that list.
One would be, of course, there's a lot of comparisons, not in terms of philosophy, but just in non-consecutive terms with Grover Cleveland,
Yeah.
who made a comeback. But here's a list that I saw today of here's what Trump survived: 2 impeachments, all the lawsuits and criminal charges, 2 assassination attempts, all the charges of being a fascist and threat to democracy, and they still couldn't stop him.
Yeah.
And just think, he not only defeated the Democratic Party, but he also defeated the elites in both parties. And just think, this election he defeated not just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Barack Obama, but it was Liz Cheney, it was Dick Cheney, it was Mitt Romney, it was the neocons and the Bushes. Bush stayed silent in this election. So, I mean, he was up against the establishment in both parties that he had to overcome. Plus the media.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Whether it's the biggest comeback story ever or not, I mean, it's easy to forget just a couple of years ago his standing, and and I know from talking to my friends that really were thick and thin through him and continued, like, man, I guess I'll put it this way: if you are President Trump, you're going to know, and look, there's a lot said that he keeps track of his friends and his enemies. Mm-hmm. I think most politicians actually, I think it's a little bit more made out of Trump doing it but if you go through that political wilderness, you know who was with you.
Yes, yeah.
As you went through it.
Yeah.
And you're going to be loyal to them. And it's loyalty in politics is a very important thing. And I want to get to that kind of before we wrap up today. Is some of that idea. So, moving to Iowa a little bit, what's old is new again is that it looks like Marionette Miller Meeks' race is going to come down to just a handful of votes, maybe a few hundred. It looks as if she is going to hold on, that they've now got enough in. I was waiting here. Supposedly even with these, as we're recording, that confirmation will come in, but Congressman Nunn in the 3rd District ended up winning by, I think, 3 points. I mean, it ended up being a little bit better of a margin than he thought. And Congresswoman Hinson and Randy Feenstra both with big wins. So continue to have a fully Republican delegation to Congress. But what we've spent a lot of time on this show and is the legislative races. and that's where Iowans for Tax Relief does a lot of work, is in the legislature and tracking some of what went on in the legislative races. So while you were monitoring MSNBC for me actually, I think at that point we were probably still on Fox News, but whatever.
Yeah.
When it became time to bathe in liberal tears, we moved over to MSNBC. But John was watching the national results, and we started tracking at 8 o'clock when the polls closed in Iowa. And so we got the Polk County results real quick. They weren't finalized until after 9 o'clock. I think some of them even dragged down to 10. We'll have to get Alan on here to kind of explain how that tabulation works. There's a few holdouts, but one of the first races where we saw was Senator Brad Zahn came up short with Matt Blake, and we talked about that race a lot. I think in the end, you can dissect an election all you want. At about 5 points, it just felt like that district had got too blue, too much Democrat for even Brad to overcome. I mean, generically, that district's much worse than that. But really, that really set things off in a bad tone, because I think everyone on our side likes Brad, just a great guy, and it's really disappointing. But I served with Brad; he was helpful to me in some of my early campaigns. That was really a downer. But from that point on, things got a lot better.
Yes, yeah.
So were you paying attention? So we initially we saw that Eddie Andrews won in Johnston, which that's a Democrat district.
Yeah.
He managed to win that and won it by a fair amount. But the Bill Gustoff race.
That was very close.
Now, he was down all along. And then at the very end, the last precinct, he takes the lead. And so that was a real roller coaster.
Yeah.
And then there was something about the tabulation in there. They ended up adding some votes later after all the precincts were reporting. So Bill ended up winning by, I think, about 300 votes, which, that by most accounts was Democrats' number one target, was trying to take out, at least on the House side, was trying to take out Gustoff. Came up short on that. And the other interesting Polk County race, and I don't want to just talk about Polk County. We are going to move off of this, John, was Mike Pike against Nate Bolton.
Yes, yeah.
Were you kind of tracking that one all along?
I was, yeah. In fact, I was. I kept refreshing KCCI.
Yeah,
and that's where I was.
Well, what happened is it was the same thing as in the Gustoff race. They had all of the precincts reporting, and it looked like Bolton had won narrowly. And then, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes later, they refreshed it again. And then even with all precincts reporting, Pike takes the lead and beat him. And there were even some congratulatory tweets and messages going out among sort of the Democrat, coalition, that congratulations to Senator Bolton. And then Mike Pike comes up on top. So that was
a major upset.
Yeah, that really was. And then that was that, because there was a point, especially on the Senate side, where like, wow, are they going to really win any of their targeted races? And then that one came in, and I think that really put a lot of wind in everyone's sails. So the Senate had 4 races that they were really targeting, which was on Pike. There was one in Dubuque, the Pam Yoakum seat, which they came up short on. And then I think the closest legislative race is Senator Sarah Trone Garriott against Mark Hansen out here in Dallas County. And I think at last count that was 19 vote difference. That'll obviously get recounted. In my experience, and I was with Alan last night, who's really done a lot of this, 19 sounds like very few votes. Recounts don't really change results very much. 1, 2, maybe 3, but 19 votes, even in a state Senate race, is really tough to overcome in a recount, unless there's really a structural error with everything, which I don't think there's any evidence that there is. So it looks like the net of all of that is Senate Republicans picked up 2 seats. So they picked up the Pike seat. They picked up 1, I'm sorry. Pike, and then Dave Sayers in Cedar Falls, and lost on. So +1.
Yes, yeah.
They will be at 35 out of 50. So 35 Republican, 15 Democrat. Then on the House side, you can interrupt my monologue anytime you want, John.
No,
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's a +1 for Senate Republicans. On the House side, so there were no incumbent House members that lost. And they were starting at 64. They did have one member not seek re-election that they didn't even field a candidate in Davenport with Luana Stoltenberg. So that was a -1 going into Election Day. But then they picked up another 3 seats. Well, they picked up 4. And I'm going back to my list here. John, where did I do with it? So one was you had kind of an upset seat, which was the Ankeny. That with the one that actually got a lot of TV action was Heather Stevenson against Democrat Heather Mattson. That one was a close. Heather Mattson closely survived that. But then going into the northern half of Ankeny, Ryan Weldon narrowly beat Representative Molly Buck. And that was kind of an upset.
Yes. Yeah.
I wondered whether that one was going to be close, but that was there. So that was one they picked up. Going back down the list, they won in Marshalltown. And I want to take these two together, and then I want to get your take on this. I know I've just been talking for a long time, but David Blum in Marshalltown beat in Democrat Sue Cahill, and Christian Hermanson in Mason City won narrowly over Jeremy True. The reason I bring that up is these are about 2 of the last of those mid-size Iowa blue-collar labor towns that Democrats still held.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be places like Ottumwa and Fort Dodge and Newton that were Democrat strongholds. Mm-hmm. And now as we just continue to pick these off, but now 2 more of them. So that's a +2 there. And anyway, I want your take on that kind of that type of community, because I know it's similar to what you talked about in Minnesota a little bit.
Well, I think that's important because when I saw the campaigns that Pike was running and some of the other ads that were coming out of Marshalltown, these were candidates that were running as sort of blue-collar Republican candidates. Mm-hmm. They weren't running as your traditional sort of your corporate tax-cutting type candidates that you normally see, and you know they're sympathetic to sort of workers, and I think that's one of the reasons why Trump has been so influential, and Trump has, and I think this has been very positive on the Republican Party, where it's okay now you can be pro-worker, and so you've seen Pike and Blum being pro-labor and pro-worker in their ads, and saying it's okay to stand up for manufacturing and the laborer, and I think voters are responding to that, and also the other thing is that the Democrats, both at the federal level and at the state legislative level, are not doing themselves any service because they have embraced such a radical agenda. Yeah. They have been moving away from a traditional, even their pro-union stance, where they've embraced, the radicalism of abortion and the transgender stuff, and so that's really pushing people away.
I think that's right, and I think when you talk about the agenda of each side, maybe taking a step back from even labor or blue collar or any worker or however you want to define that. But I think there's a lot of folks, at every level of the economy that we talked about this several times leading up to the election, John, and inflation, economic conditions, immigration, strains on the family budget, tax policy, these things that are drivers of every Iowan's personal lives. They, think about it as the kitchen table issues that people talk about, is that you had one party speaking to that. And maybe it was just the tailwinds of a difficult economy. And then so Republicans have all of those forces going for them. And poll after poll showed that Americans and Iowans trusted Republicans on those issues more than Democrats.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, Democrats seem to be focused on a very narrow set of issues. And I come back to the idea that, why did they do that? Well, they were winning on those issues. They were above water on abortion, so they ran on abortion. Well, come to find out, it wasn't moving voters. That the folks that made abortion the number one issue were already going to vote Democrat. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't really moving anyone. Yeah. And so I think whether you want to call it labor or anything else, it seemed to me that conservative candidates were speaking to the issues that were important to Iowans. And I would say even too, you want to look at the Dallas County Senate race, Sarah Trone-Garrett, Mark Hansen. I mean, that became about tax policy.
It did, yes.
In many ways. And both sides had an argument on that.
Yeah.
And they were making it, which actually was refreshing, that it wasn't just being litigated solely on abortion.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's one thing I want to bring up in this in multiple races. In fact, especially towards the end, when there was a number of candidates that had op-eds in various papers, and a number of them were addressing property taxes. And this will be a wake-up call for legislators, because both going in for the Republicans nationally and for the state legislature coming in now are going to have to deliver.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to property taxes for the state legislature, taxpayers want something done. Mm-hmm. And so Republicans are campaigning on that, and legislators are going to have to deliver. And so this is, and I think they will.
Yeah.
I think this will be an opportunity for this session to get something done finally on it. And, taxpayers they've had enough. And this was an issue that they certainly heard about on the campaign trail, and it's something that has to be addressed.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, and we're not going to do it today, but we're going to have a lot to say about this election, about the coming legislative session over the next couple of months. But what's the takeaway? Because every election is instructive on the policies that follow. Is it a lot? Is it a little? Is it all of those things? So I really do want to spend some time on that, on what we can expect on that. A few other Iowa things. So we're going to have Sarah's going to be in here tomorrow, and she's been doing a lot of work today. I mean, she's been doing a lot of work for weeks on some of the bond elections, which kind of flew under the radar. We tried to elevate them as much as we could, but we're going to be looking at that. A couple of highlights, and I'm going to spoil a little bit of tomorrow, but if you were a voter in Waukee, you dodged a couple of pretty big bullets. A taxpayer last night. You had the Dallas County Criminal Justice Building and a aquatic center in Waukee. So congratulations to property tax conscious voters in the city of Waukee last night. There was, did you follow this a little bit, John, the two constitutional amendments that were on the ballot last night, which were one on the gubernatorial line of succession and the voter eligibility provision. Anything to take away on those? Or
they were, to my perspective, they were non-controversial, kind of straightforward. Maybe there's disagreement on that, but
there's a little disagreement on that.
But I wasn't surprised on the results of those, I guess. But
I wasn't either.
Yeah.
I mean, the voter eligibility made a kind of a wording change on citizenship, and it much more clearly establishes that you must be a U.S. citizen to vote in elections in the state of Iowa. And this is another one of those ones that I don't understand the messaging from the left. Some of the liberals were really opposed to that because, well, we don't need that. That's already law. well, okay, but then why do you oppose it either?
Yeah.
It seems to me that, methinks thou doth protest too much if you're getting bent out of shape about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that passed, and you got to be a citizen to vote in our elections. It seems pretty fundamental. And if you can bring any amount of clarity to that, I don't know why that is controversial to anyone. And the line of succession thing is I think pretty straightforward, pretty easy. I personally probably would have added a little more to that and how it all works, but I can certainly understand. This started when I was still in the legislature, and it started when Governor Branstad got appointed to be ambassador to China, and then Kim Reynolds, at the time lieutenant governor, becomes governor, and there was there was some ambiguity in the law, which was made far worse by Attorney General at the time, Tom Miller, kind of bungled the whole analysis on it, and so we're just going to clean that up, and it's pretty straightforward, and it's fine. My one aside on this is that I think that the Constitution should require some level of voter or representative assent to a nominated lieutenant governor if there's a vacancy in that office. It's a constitutional officer, and whether it is, maybe it's Senate confirmation or something, I think the governor should get who she wants to fill that spot, and it shouldn't be anything too cumbersome. But if you're putting a constitutional officer in, there ought to be some action of the legislature.
I think that I would agree with that.
But maybe that's for another day, and I'm not trying to overcomplicate things. But anyway, okay, so we've covered all that. So then, I forgot one other one, and it's because it was in Dubuque, and far away from the, but Democrat Representative Chuck Eisenhart, longtime incumbent, actually got elected the same year I did in 2008, lost. And that's another one of those traditionally blue-collar labor towns. I mean, Dubuque being the packing town. And he lost to Jennifer Smith. So the net of all that is we had a breakdown of 64 Republican, 36 Democrat in the House. That'll now be 67 Republican and 33 Democrat. Those are super majorities in both chambers. Not that it really matters in Iowa. The only thing that really matters is Senate confirmations and gubernatorial appointments. It's the only thing that a super majority really matters for. But they're there.
There's some, just looking at some places in Pennsylvania and Ohio, like some members of Congress and Senator Bob Casey, who appears to be
what's going to happen with that one?
I think he appears to be losing his Senate reelection.
Wow. I mean, that's been a half a century of Casey's and holding that Senate seat.
Yeah, and the thought is that one of the reasons he's losing is because of immigration.
Well,
and there's also some longtime Democrats in Ohio who are barely holding on because of the immigration issue, and so I don't know. This could be some spillover, and I'm not sure.
Well, I think too in Pennsylvania, and I don't profess to be an expert on Pennsylvania politics, other than it's sort of upper Midwest, Rust Belt sort of politics, and there's a little bit of spillover with Iowa. But I mean, look at John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, their other senator, who actually has carved out, some degree of popularity both around the country and in Pennsylvania for not just taking every liberal position. He's been very strong in Israel. And maybe that is a lesson for some of these other folks that think they're safe, that they cannot always just toe the line with the liberal agenda.
And Tammy Baldwin almost barely held on in Wisconsin, and
go ahead, John.
One other thing I just want to mention, just from a broad perspective in Iowa, because we're always hearing how awful things are in Iowa from the left, but to me, even though you had Senator Zahn was defeated, which I was disappointed in, but I still think overall you saw the results of Iowans in a sense reaffirming the conservative agenda of Governor Reynolds. And I think, there was, I forget if it was one of the analysts on our favorite news network, KCCI on Channel 8, saying that, it was a good night to be a Republican. But I mean, it certainly, I think Iowans overall are reaffirming that they are satisfied with this agenda.
I'll put a little bit finer point on that. Yeah, certainly, if you are a Republican candidate, it was a good night to be a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get to this again. It was a really good night to be a taxpayer in the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe get into some idea of winners and losers. But if there are winners last night, it's taxpayers in Iowa.
Yes.
At the prospect that they are going to continue to get wins because of the reaffirmation of the agenda of Governor Reynolds and the legislature. Mm-hmm. So
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, too, it's important to remember that these aren't just Iowa trends. I ask you about Minnesota because I'm kind of curious, but it's instructive. Pennsylvania can be instructive on Iowa. There has been a political realignment.
Yes.
That just when you think it might be over, you find out that it's not. I think it started about 2010 of this huge shift of, rural, small town, moderate Democrats that have woke up. It's a little bit like what happened in the Deep South in the 80s and 90s, and they realize that the party has left them, and they discover that they're actually Republicans.
Yeah,
you see that in Northeast Iowa. You see it on the Mississippi River towns. And we talked about these towns that have now finally moved over and are solidly Republican. Well, that's not just in Iowa. It is in Minnesota. It's in the Iron Range.
Yeah.
It is in Wisconsin, especially in the southwest part of the state. It's in places like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And it's just a new environment. And there's far more red than
it is one thing I'd have to say, it is President Trump that I would say is not in a sense rediscovering or sort of recreating a new agenda, but he's rediscovering an older sense of conservatism.
Yeah.
That we've talked about before, of going back to sort of an economic patriotism of putting America first, and that whole agenda I think has been key to this, and that has appealed to a lot of people.
I think that's right, John, and we have discussed, and a lot of ink's been spilled over the battle for the soul of the Republican Party. We had a conversation the other day in the pre-production meeting about what happens to the America First movement if Trump loses, and some concern for that. You know what makes sure that other form of conservatism stays alive inside the Republican Party over the long term is winning elections.
Yes, yeah.
Because the establishment, the old guard, I'm sure they have their set of policy solutions, and I'm sure they're disappointed that they have to now contend with more economic nationalism.
Yeah.
Make no mistake. But most people really, above that, really like to win.
Yes, yeah.
And if that brand of politics and that set of policy solutions can win national elections, I imagine we're going to see plenty of it going forward.
Yeah.
So I didn't plan on coming with that take today, John, but there you go. That's a free one.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we probably ought to break this out into a separate episode, but I can't help myself. So winners and losers, we'll go through these quickly. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that. I kind of started it off with sort of the taxpayers. Any thoughts on winners and losers from last night?
Well, I think definitely, I mean, this is broad speaking, but I think a big loser was the media.
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole bias and the, I should have wrote it down, but one of our colleagues had a phrase, they called it, he
got it from Scott Jennings on CNN.
And
he referred to it as the political information complex,
yes,
which might be my favorite new phrase. So look, he's sitting on a set of part of the guilty, but they were big. I like that. They were losers because it was just all this noise that didn't end up being accurate.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to give you the counter argument on that, though. Deep down, the producers and the owners of these news networks, I think they're pretty happy that Donald Trump just got elected.
Oh yeah,
because people love to tune into the Trump show.
Yeah, and another. I hate to say another loser was the Iowa poll.
Oh yeah.
I mean that just another winner was the a selfish promotion is the ITR Foundation poll.
Yep. The gold standard.
Yes.
In Iowa political polling. And we're not even trying to compete for that title now.
No.
We just are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another winner is in this has been the America First message.
Yep.
And then overall, I think if you want to look at it locally, I think the message by Iowa Republicans focusing on property tax resonated with voters. That was very crucial in this election.
Yep. I agree with all of that, and you can get some of the national winners and losers from anyone, but it occurs to me that certainly like the Never Trump movement, not the disaffected sort of Nikki Haley movement or our friends at AEI, but the people that made a lot of money, the Liz Cheneys of the world, the Lincoln Project, those people. I mean, we all knew how vapid that was. But I mean, come on, and it's time for them to go away. Yeah. They made their money. They got their paycheck. Go away. Even
Nikki Haley had sort of this lukewarm op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Just this tepid, lukewarm endorsement of Trump before the election. And
so I'm going to try another one on winners and losers from an Iowa standpoint, and this is one that I think some people would consider. But the midterms start today. So does 28 caucuses. But the idea being that if you had a Trump midterm, so if Trump wins, then the 26 midterms become challenging for Republicans, which is historically the case, especially in a second midterm. You look at 2006 with George Bush was a wipeout. But I would actually argue that if you were an aspiring statewide Democrat, that you're kind of a loser last night. Because at Trump plus 13, this state has now become so reliably red that even in a weak environment for Republicans, it's still probably a hill too far to climb.
That's a good point. I agree. Yeah.
So if you're Rob Sand or Jennifer Confrist or whoever these others are that want to run statewide, I'm not as excited about the prospect of running in a Trump midterm as I may have been before last night. So that's one.
And what issue are they going to run on this time? I mean,
I'm going to guess
that could still change, but
I'm going to guess they run on abortion.
Yeah.
But hey, what do I know? It's going to be all Trump. They won't learn their lesson. It's going to be Trump, 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 and we know that. But a few winners. And these are probably pretty straightforward. But Speaker Grassley and Majority Leader Whitver, they grew their majorities. They were already at historically high numbers, and they grew those majorities. And that isn't easy. And those guys are going out, raising the money, and making the smart decisions. And so I think both of them can, tip of the cap to both of them that can lay claim to growing big majorities. And we know that especially Leader Whitver had certainly plenty of challenges along the way in leading his caucus to growing their majority. Yeah. So an opportunity for Leader Whitver to, mic drop moment.
Absolutely.
We did it all and we kept going. Yeah. So, and the other one too, and we're going to spend some time on this, but coming full circle to something we talked about at the outset of the episode, those folks that were with Donald Trump, especially before the caucuses, the high profile ones, they're winners. Yeah. And that may yet include Brad Zahn. Yeah. But it especially includes former AG Matt Whitaker, who probably was chief among them, stuck with Trump all the way through. Yeah. Iowa Attorney General Brenna Byrd. We talked to AG Byrd last night. Yeah. She was thrilled with the whole thing. She was the high profile Trump endorser. Iowa Republican Party Chairman Jeff Kaufman, who didn't endorse but has been very and then Representative Bobby Kaufman was one of the other state chairs, and a lot of other legislators, but they're winners. And I'm not saying they're all going to go take federal appointments and all that stuff, but politically, that's how it works.
Does that include me?
I'll make sure it includes you, John. Hey, you were there. Yeah. You went and saw the man during the caucuses. Right. Yeah. You got there early, and you know what? I'm going to make that happen. Yeah. We're going to get you signed dark MAGA hat or something. Yeah. We're going to make sure that you get, maybe you could be like, UN ambassador or something. Let's get you that spot, John. That'd be great. All right. Well, anything else, John? I mean, we've really covered a lot of ground today, but I want to come back to this because a lot of these things we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Like I said, going forward, but I wanted to get up here. I didn't intend to talk this long, but we needed to cover these things and give folks our initial thoughts. So overall, like you said, it was a great night to be a Republican, great night to be a conservative, a great night to be a taxpayer in the state of Iowa.
Yes,
We're going to cover that tomorrow with Sarah and some of these local referenda, and there's just a lot of really good things. It's exciting to be here at Iowans for Tax Relief, to sort of be at the core of a lot of what's happening, and we're just thrilled. So,
if I could just say one thing, and it's probably controversial, but I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. And I think one thing that that put more awareness on the Trump agenda that was a loser was John Deere.
Yeah.
For the outsourcing.
Yeah.
That just made a lot of people angry, and rightly so.
And again, it comes to some of the economic weakness and all of the things that go with it. So yes, it was John Deere, and it was also Peanut the squirrel. It was a whole bunch of things, John. But it all sort of came together there at the end. So I had to get my Peanut the squirrel. Yeah. Or pour one out for Peanut for everything he did for us. So anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Appreciate you joining us. Appreciate everyone that's part of political campaigns in the state of Iowa. If you worked on one, if you were a candidate, if you were a volunteer, win or lose, thank you for contributing to the process, because it is often thankless work. It's hard work, but it's also very rewarding, and it is definitely very important. So with all of that, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends, and we will see you next time on ITR Live.